In the frozen winter of 1412, in a small and forgotten village called Domremy, on the edge of war-torn France, a child was born into a world already collapsing. Her name was Jeanne d'Arc. No one could have known that this illiterate peasant girl would one day change the course of a 100-year conflict, crown a king, terrify hardened generals, and become one of the most controversial figures in human history. To some, she would be remembered as a saint chosen by God. To others, a dangerous witch possessed by demons. And to many powerful men of her time, she was something else entirely, a tool, a symbol, a political pawn to be used and discarded. This is not a legend. This is not a fairy tale. This is the true story of Joan of Arc. France in the early 15th century was a nation bleeding to death. The 100 Years' War had dragged on for generations, draining the land of its people, its wealth, and its hope. English armies occupied large portions of northern France. Burgundian allies betrayed their own countrymen. Villages burned, crops failed, refugees filled the roads. The French crown itself was barely breathing. King Charles VI was mad, unable to rule, while rival factions tore the court apart. The English king, Henry V, claimed the French throne as his own. By the time Joan was a child, France already seemed lost. Joan grew up poor but deeply religious. Her parents were farmers, and her life followed the simple rhythm of fields, seasons, and church bells. She could not read or write, but she knew her prayers by heart. The church was her refuge in a world of violence. According to her later testimony, when she was around 13 years old, something extraordinary happened. While in her father's garden, she heard a voice. The voice, she said, came with a great light. It identified itself as Saint Michael, soon joined by Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret. These voices gave her a terrifying mission. She was to drive the English out of France and lead the Dauphin, Charles, to his coronation at Reims. At first, Joan resisted. She was a girl, a peasant, untrained, powerless, but the voices returned again and again, growing more insistent. For years, she kept this secret, but as French fortunes worsened and the English tightened their grip, Joan believed the time had come. In 1429, at just 16 or 17 years old, Joan did the unthinkable. She left her village and traveled to Vaucouleurs, a military stronghold, demanding an audience with the local commander. She told him God had sent her to save France. At first, she was laughed at, mocked, sent away. But she refused to leave. Her confidence was unsettling. She spoke with certainty about battles she had never seen, strategies she had never learned, and prophecies that would soon come true. Eventually, desperate times bred desperate decisions. Joan was sent to meet the Dauphin, Charles, who resided at Chinon. The court expected a joke. Instead, Joan passed a test no one thought possible. When Charles hid among his courtiers, Joan walked straight to him and knelt. She told him things, secrets only he knew, details he later confirmed under oath. The effect was electric. Charles was still cautious. Joan was examined by theologians and clergy to determine whether she was a witch or a messenger of God. They found nothing heretical in her words. She prayed constantly, she spoke humbly, and she demanded no reward, no title, no wealth. All she asked for was armor, a banner, and permission to march. Against all logic, she was given command. Joan did not wield a sword in battle, as legends later claimed. Instead, she carried a white banner emblazoned with the name of Jesus. She rode at the front, fearless, shouting encouragement, shaming soldiers into courage. Her presence alone seemed to change everything. Discipline improved. Looting stopped. Soldiers confessed their sins. Morale soared. The city of Orléans, under English siege and on the brink of collapse, was her first test. Veteran commanders doubted her, but Joan pushed for aggressive action. She ignored cautious strategies and demanded direct assaults. Against overwhelming odds, the French attacked and won. Within days, the English siege was broken. It was a miracle. Across France, Rumors spread like wildfire. A holy maiden sent by God, a virgin warrior, a living sign that France had not been abandoned. English soldiers, hardened by decades of war, began to fear her. Some believed she was protected by divine power. Others whispered that she was a sorceress whose spells brought defeat. Joan pressed forward relentlessly. She insisted that Charles be crowned at Reims, deep in enemy-held territory. The march was suicidal by conventional standards, but town after town surrendered without a fight. The myth of Joan was stronger than any army. On July 17, 1429, Charles was crowned King of France in Reims Cathedral, just as Joan had promised. She stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, saying her mission was fulfilled. But this was the turning point, not of victory, but of betrayal. Once crowned, Charles no longer needed Joan as desperately. The court, always uneasy with her influence, began to sideline her. Peace negotiations were attempted. Military momentum slowed. Joan, however, believed God's command was unfinished. She wanted to push on, to drive the English completely from France. Without full royal support, her power waned. In 1430, while defending the town of Compiègne, Joan was captured by Burgundian forces, French allies of the English. Charles did nothing to ransom her. The girl who had crowned him was now politically inconvenient. Joan was sold to the English. What followed was not a trial, but an execution disguised as justice. The English could not afford to let Joan become a martyr. Instead, they aimed to destroy her reputation. If she was proven a witch or heretic, then her victories would be invalidated, and Charles's coronation would be tainted. She was imprisoned in chains, guarded by soldiers, denied legal counsel. The trial was controlled entirely by her enemies. She was questioned endlessly, trapped with theological riddles designed to force her into heresy. Despite her youth and lack of education, Joan answered with astonishing intelligence. When asked if she was in God's grace, she replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God so keep me." Even her judges were stunned. But the verdict had already been decided. She was accused of heresy, witchcraft, and wearing men's clothing, a charge twisted into a religious crime. Under threat of immediate execution, she briefly signed a confession she could not read. When she later resumed wearing male clothing, likely for protection against abuse, it was declared a relapse. The sentence was death. On May 30th, 1431, Joan of Arc was burned alive in the marketplace of Rouen. She was 19 years old. As the flames rose, she called out the name of Jesus again and again. Witnesses said even her executioner wept. The English scattered her ashes into the river, fearing relics. But they were too late. 25 years later, with the English driven from France, a retrial was ordered. Joan was declared innocent. Her conviction was overturned. She was recognized as a martyr. In 1920, nearly 5 centuries after her death, Joan of Arc was canonized as a saint. So who was she? A saint? A witch? Or a political pawn? She was a believer in a brutal age of faith, a weapon in a war she did not create, a symbol powerful enough to frighten kings and generals. Joan of Arc was not just a girl who heard voices. She was proof that ideas, belief, and courage can change history more than armies ever could. And that is why, centuries later, her story still burns. If stories like Joan of Arc's, where truth, myth, and power collide, fascinate you, make sure to subscribe to History Tale. Let us know in the comments. Do you believe Joan was truly divinely guided or used by forces far greater than herself? And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history's most controversial figures, hit the like button. It helps keep these stories alive.